It is morning in an Italian hill town, and a man is weeping in the street. His brother is dead. He tears at his beard, he pulls at his own clothing, he cries out so the whole square can hear him. And a few steps away, a clerk in the pay of the city quietly writes down his name, not to comfort him, to fine him. Because in this town, grief has a price, and that man has just gone over it. We tend to think of medieval law as obsessed with the body, what you wore, what you ate, who you were allowed to marry. But some of the strangest rules ever written reach for something far more intimate than a coat or a loaf of bread. They reached for your tears. So here is a question that really should not have an answer. Why would a government be frightened of a grieving man? This is reason found, where the smallest, most human things turn out to hide the darkest history. And this one begins at a funeral. To understand why a city would punish a mourner, you first have to understand what a medieval funeral actually sounded like. It was not quiet. It was not gentle. It was loud, public, and built to be witnessed. When someone of standing died in a 13th century Italian town, grief became a performance, and the whole community was the audience. Mourners filled the open squares. They wailed. They struck their own chests. Women pulled their hair loose. Men tore at their beards and ripped their clothing in front of everyone. According to the historian Carol Lansing, who spent years inside these towns' records, as many as 100 men might gather in the streets to weep and cry out together over a single death. And here is the part that feels backwards to us now. None of that was shameful. It was the opposite. A loud lament was an act of honor. The harder you grieved, the more you proved to the world how much the dead man had mattered and how strong the family that mourned him still was. Quiet grief, by contrast, looked like indifference. It looked like weakness. There was even a duty in it. If a powerful man died and the street stayed calm, that silence was read as an insult, a sign that nobody important had been lost. Neighbors noticed who turned up and how hard they wept. To grieve quietly for the wrong person could be as dangerous to your reputation as grieving too loudly would later become to your purse. So grief was not a private feeling. It was a public statement, and a statement made by 100 furious weeping men packed into a square is a very particular kind of thing. Somewhere, the men who ran these cities looked at that crowd and decided it could not be allowed to go on, and the first people they came for were the ones crying loudest. In the 13th century, across the city-states of northern and central Italy, a wave of new laws appeared. We call them sumptuary laws, the same family of rules that decided what color you could wear or how many guests came to your wedding. But this particular batch did not regulate cloth or feasts or jewels. They regulated feeling. This was not a handful of odd local rules. Between the years 1200 and 1500, governments in more than 40 Italian cities passed over 300 separate sumptuary laws, reaching into almost every visible corner of a person's life. And the reach was astonishing. In Florence, the rules followed a woman right into the funeral itself. Even there, even as she mourned, her hair was required to stay neatly coiffed and covered, not loose, not torn, not wild. The state wanted a say in how you looked at the side of a grave. In towns such as Bologna, Perugia, and above all Orvieto, it became an offense to grieve too loudly. The laws aimed at exactly the things a funeral was built on: wailing in the street, beating the body, tearing the hair, the beard, the clothes. The display itself was now a punishable act. Most Italian cities wrote rules like this and then quietly ignored them. Orvieto did not. Orvieto enforced them, which was so unusual that historians single the town out for it. And the way it enforced them is where the story starts to turn strange. The fines were not flat. They were scaled to the sorrow. The harder a man wept, the more violently he tore at himself, the more he owed. The town had put a working tariff on grief. Now read the laws themselves, and it gets stranger still. They are written as though the problem is women. The texts complain about hysterical, excessive, womanish displays of emotion, the sort no respectable man would ever stoop to. So you would expect the courts to be crowded with women. They were not. When Lansing went through the actual prosecutions, almost every person being fined was a man, and not poor men either. Knights, nobles. The most powerful figures in the city were the ones being hauled in and charged for crying too hard at a funeral, which leaves one very awkward question hanging in the air. Who, exactly, was writing these laws? The men writing the laws were the same men being fined by them. The ruling families of a town like Orvieto passed legislation against loud grief, then went to a funeral, grieved loudly anyway, and paid the penalty for breaking their own rule. They taxed themselves for weeping. That only makes sense once you stop thinking about tears and start thinking about power. A funeral in a medieval Italian city was never only a funeral, it was a gathering. 100 armed, grieving, furious men in a public square, mourning a dead ally, looked almost identical to the opening scene of a vendetta. The dead man could become a martyr. The grief could harden into a cause. A city that lived in permanent dread of feuding families tearing it apart looked at that scene and saw not sadness, but the first spark of a riot. So the law was never really about good manners, it was about crowd control. By turning grief into a finable offense, the city gave itself a legal hand on the temperature of every funeral. Too loud, and an official could move in, not to stop a man from feeling, but to stop a feeling from becoming a faction. Some towns went so far as to plant informers in the crowd, to note down exactly who wept beyond what the law allowed. And if that instinct sounds safely medieval, listen to how we still talk. We praise the people who hold it together. We call open grief undignified, hysterical, a scene. We tell men, especially, to keep their composure and not break down. The whole vocabulary of the stiff upper lip is the polite descendant of a law that once put a price on a sob. If hidden histories like this one are why you are here, a subscribe genuinely helps the channel keep digging them up. Because there is one last detail about these laws, and it is the part that gives the whole game away. The detail is this. The medieval cities did not invent a single part of it. They were repeating a move almost as old as the state itself. Centuries earlier, in Athens, the lawgiver Solon had done exactly the same thing. Around the year 594 before the Common Era, he forbade mourners from clawing at their own flesh, banned the hired, set-piece laments, and made it illegal to wail for anyone who was not close family. He ordered the body carried to the grave in silence. He even ruled that no woman under the age of 60, unless she was close kin, could walk in the funeral procession at all. Rome went further. Its oldest written laws, the 12 Tables, capped what a family could spend on a funeral and openly outlawed excessive mourning. The same pattern, again and again, across 1,000 years and a whole continent, and every single time the stated reason was restraint, decency, public order, and every single time the real reason sat just underneath it. Solon passed his law in a city being torn apart by feuding clans, where a tomb crowded with weeping kinsmen was precisely where the next round of bloodshed got planned. The state was never afraid of sadness. It was afraid of what a crowd of grieving people might decide to do next. So picture, one last time, that man in Orvieto. He stands over his dead brother. Honor, the honor of his entire family, demands that he weep openly, tear his clothes, let the whole town hear how much this loss costs him. The law demands the exact opposite. Whatever he chooses, he loses something, his standing or his coin. And in the crowd, in no hurry at all, a clerk is already writing his name. The man knows it. He weeps anyway. Some things are worth the fine. That is the strange truth folded inside the oldest grief laws in history. They were never really about tears. They were about the frightening power of people who feel the same thing, in the same place, at the same moment. A government can regulate your coat and your dinner and lose nothing. A government that has to regulate your sorrow has quietly confessed how afraid of you it really is. So the next time someone tells you to keep it together, remember there were once men who would rather pay a fine than do exactly that. This was Reason Found. Stay curious.